Hello and welcome. My name is Jody Lynn Craven, founder of Abundance Consciousness, and this is my dear friend Heather Marie.
Hi, I'm Heather Marie, founder of Soulgate. Welcome to Channel Squared, where we have extraordinary channeled conversations about everyday life topics. Every week, we choose a topic, connect with you, the divine, and our guides, and then channel here with you live.
Yes, and today we're talking about sexual healing and embodiment. So for many people, this is going to make your cheeks a little bit rosy. I'm feeling the flush come on. But the question is there a greater awareness with our bodies, with our partners, and spirituality that we're missing by not having this conversation? And joining us today is sex expert Heather Shannon. Heather is an AASECT Certified Sex Therapist who helps people remove shame and stigma around sexuality while becoming a more conscious relationship partner. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you. Thank you, Jody Lynn and Heather Marie. It's great to be here. And I love this topic of combining sexuality with consciousness and spirituality. So let's do it.
Well, we're going to dive into it because I'm so curious. When we were prepping for this show, I was like, okay, what kind of questions? And I think we should start with that. Like, what does healing, spirituality, consciousness have to do with sex? Because I feel like a lot of people have split the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when I think about why I got into this field, it's actually because of consciousness, bringing consciousness to sexuality. So that's perfect. But I do think that sexuality and why I was drawn to this, is because it exists more in the dark. I think that so many people are now on like a personal growth journey through entrepreneurship or through, working with their emotions in a different way or through pursuing a spiritual path. But I think that sexuality as a path, even to becoming more conscious, to becoming more connected, to becoming more of who you are and expressing who you are, is kind of like underexplored at this point.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why? Just because it's awkward?
I don't think it's inherently awkward. I think that we've been socialized for it to be awkward. And I do think it's really important on such a fundamental level, because when you think about it, none of us would exist without sex. So I think there's some kind of like weird egoic discomfort with being alive, with being in physical form, with, how we're created, and it's like, that's fundamental when you think about it that way. And so I think also we're kind of indoctrinated, depending on what your upbringing is. I grew up in Chicago. It's pretty, liberal, fairly progressive. A lot of people are not super religious. And so I think it actually had less of the shame and stigma, but I still felt it growing up. I was raised Catholic, and there's the whole idea of like, you shouldn't have sex until you get married. And, I remember my mom kind of being like, sexual things are okay if it's art, because then it's not really sexual. I'm like, well, first of all, it is still sexual, but it's kind of like, porn is not okay, sex work is not okay, and I think as you go down a spiritual path, you realize like these are all just thoughts; they're just constructs.
Mm-hmm.
You can't touch them, you can't grab them. There's no factuality to it, and I think that part of why I was drawn to this path too is that I grew up with a lot of discomfort. I grew up with discomfort around my body. I grew up with fear about getting pregnant and fear about getting diseases and, major hesitation about talking about sex publicly. And so I actually do think a lot of times it's people who, like me, or maybe grew up more conservative, have kind of gone on this journey to be like, wait a second, like, what have I been taught? And like, does this even make any sense?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel good, because it's like, it doesn't feel good to feel discomfort in your body or discomfort with an aspect of who you are, and I think of sexual energy as life force energy. So it's like, if you're uncomfortable and kind of like dimming your sexual energy, I think you're also kind of dimming your life force energy.
Yeah,
I think that's really interesting. And you bring up something that kind of, for me, what sex like does for me as a human in this, experience, and being spiritual and as connected as I am. And that is that it really brings me back into my body. I tend to exist out here a lot. And so, being able to have that experience, it allows me to come back to my body and sort of ground into the fact that I am still having this human experience. So I think that that's really something important, especially for, like our listeners, to use sex almost as a therapeutic release from being in this experience all the time, right? Because like when we're out here in this experience all the time, and we work in this arena of channeling beings from the other side, and trying to assist people through that ascension space, you tend to really reside out here and not as much in here. And so, that is one thing that's really therapeutic for me, to really ground back into my own body. And it doesn't even have to be like partnered sex. It could be, solo sex.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And I love, Heather, how you said how you were talking about getting to know that side of you, because it is a part of you. You have it in your DNA, you have it in your the way that your body is built, male or female, however, it's a part of you. And when you're not having that conversation, at least with yourself, or being open to exploring it, you're cutting off a piece of you.
Yeah, that's how I feel. And I kind of feel like there's degrees of that with sex. So you might think, I can talk about sex, I'm pretty comfortable, but it might be like, comfortable with sex as long as it's within these parameters.
Like my little vanilla box.
Yeah, like if it sticks in the vanilla box and it's just like, a man and a woman and they're married, then it's like, okay, maybe. But then it's like the more little things we tweak and change, or if there's even like a thought that you have that you're like, ooh, I feel kind of shameful about this thought, or like, ooh, like I take too long to orgasm, or ooh, I just wish my partner would do this, or I like need this specific way, or that's weird that I need that, or I have these like thoughts pop into my head like I wish they weren't about sex, so there's so many layers to it. So I kind of that's why I view it as a path, it's just like any other kind of personal growth or personal development journey.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
When you're working with your couples, do you find that that there's kind of like an underlying theme that occurs in maybe their I'm going to call it dysfunction?
Okay.
For lack of a better term right now off the top of my head. But like, do you find that there's sort of an underlying theme that you see with your couples?
There's several. I do think there's some beliefs around sex is for young people that I've kind of noticed. It's like, okay, well, like when you're procreating, like sex is for procreation. So like once you're past that age, like, should you really be having sex anymore? Like, are you even a sexual person? I mean, could not agree more. And I will say a lot of these beliefs are not at the forefront. These are things we find maybe when we like go digging a little bit. I also think there's grief sometimes, people who have like medical trauma maybe, or who have had a hysterectomy, or
so is that what you mean when you say medical trauma, or is it like
sometimes it's a lot more than just a hysterectomy? I mean, some people have had, all sorts of, maybe vaginal health issues or uterine health issues, or had to have an ovary removed, or have cysts and have had like multiple surgeries. And so I kind of think then like that area of the body can like hold some trauma from the medical stuff. And then, I mean, let alone like sexual abuse and, rape and stuff like that, where that part of the body can hold trauma. So multiple different layers of trauma can be held there. It could also just be like for myself, it's like, I can be like a tense person at times, and be like, oh, I'm clenching, clenching my whole body but that also like even the idea that like we have pelvic floor muscles. Like, I don't even know if I knew that we had like pelvic floor muscles until the last 5 years.
Yeah.
You
I don't even know what
know?
that does.
Exactly. It's like Kegels, or like if you kind of squeeze, like you're trying not to pee or something like that. It's like those are muscles. There's muscles down there doing things that are actually very related to your pleasure and to like all sorts of function. And so for me, that's like kind of one of the great tragedies. And Heather, you kind of got into this a little bit. Like, I think the way our culture is approaching this, it's creating a disconnect from our bodies, you know? And there's this part of me, I think, that's like grieving a little bit that like we don't all have this really like detailed knowledge of how our bodies function, because it's kind of been hidden from us, you know? It's like, this is not covered in sex ed. It's not covered in schools.
No.
Parents don't get into this with you. And so it's like, if you don't seek out sex educators, sex therapists, pelvic floor physical therapists, even like the gynecologist, you know, like, I think I found out at like, and it was pretty recent again, probably in the last 5 years. They're like, oh, we need to get a longer tool to do your pap smear. And I was like, I never knew I had a long vagina. No.
Is that normal? Is that supposed to be that way? That's what's going through my head if that was me.
Right. And I almost think that even like gynecologists are probably like, I shouldn't like tell people too much, or I don't want people to like think they're different or weird or whatever. But I'm also kind of like, I kind of want to know what's up, you know? It's like, I think the rest of us don't really, you know, spend a lot of time looking at vaginas, or at least the number that gynecologists see. So I just, you know, I just think that like, it's something that we're working on, I think, as a culture. I do think we're moving in the right direction in a lot of ways. I love Netflix. I love what Netflix has been doing, you know, with like the sex education show. They had one that was about like a dominatrix, you know, paying her way through school or something like that. It was fictional. They had the, you know, how to build a sex room. So I think that they're finding.
I loved that show, by the way.
I mean,
How to Build Sex Room. It was a fun one. Great.
I watched one with my mom. That was maybe a mistake.
I've been trying to get my mom to watch, but
oh my God. I was impressed she got through one. I was like, okay, well, that was probably enough for us. But yeah,
I think you're so right. I feel duped, you know, being in my 30s now. I'm 37. And I feel like I'm just learning about my cycle even. Like I remember in my early 20s being like, don't get pregnant, don't get pregnant, don't get pregnant, being so afraid. And then spending the last, you know, 4 years practicing for a baby, you know, that's what I'm going to call it now. And realizing that it wasn't as easy as I thought it was when I was 20, or maybe that there's a distortion there too. And, you know, I'm older, so it's harder, or all of these things, but all of these things are at play with our body, how we see ourselves, how we interact with our partner.
Absolutely. 100%. And I mean, I'm one of the sex and relationship pros for the Peanut app. And so it's a lot of like new moms on there. And so I've even learned more working with them, but you know, just the idea that like breastfeeding produces certain hormones that reduce libido.
Really?
Like why is that not common knowledge? You know, like I'm like
writing it down.
Writing it down.
And it makes sense kind of that like if you have a small child that's like, you know, still breastfeeding, that like your body is sort of like, okay, let's shut it down a little bit so we don't have another one too quick, because that might be too much to handle or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's like, why don't we know this? Or even like pelvic floor physical therapy. It's kind of recommended for like all new moms, but I think it's just starting to catch on in the US, and Europe is like way ahead of us with that stuff.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Well, now, thank God we're talking, Jody.
Yeah, that's right.
So there's a book, and I'm going to spring this on you. Maybe you've read it, maybe you haven't, but I found it really interesting. And I have a sneaky feeling you probably know this one, but it's the book title, and I'm hoping I can say this on YouTube and we don't get flagged and banned, but it's called Pussy, a Reclamation.
Okay.
And it is a fantastic book about the female genitalia. For those ladies that are listening, you guys, sorry. I mean, you could probably learn a lot from it too, but one of the things that I found really interesting as I was exploring this literature was that how little we as women actually know about our own physical anatomy.
100%.
And, you know, and I was even surprised at how little I knew about the anatomy, especially the outer anatomy, considering I spent 26 years doing Brazilian bikini waxes for ladies. You would think I would have that shit on lock, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's so fascinating how little, even if you're exposed to it on a daily basis,
Right. Like you probably saw more
know.
vulvas than almost anyone. Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
Almost everyone in town.
Yes.
So, you know, and the thing is it's like, it's really fascinating at how when sex is discussed and the female anatomy is discussed, it's almost like taught that the only thing that matters is the vagina.
100%.
And
Where
I'm like,
to
the
even begin
vagina
with this?
isn't even the important part. Like, it's just a small piece. Like, it's not even it's from a pleasure perspective, it's the least important for women.
Right.
And it's the part that the whole world tends to shine the light on. You know, I don't know, maybe that's the shift from the, you know, patriarchy to the matriarchy that we're starting to see.
Yes, I think so. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I also think that's part of becoming more conscious, is to see, like, you know, because I think at first we don't see, and we're like, okay, this is how it is, and this is how we're raised, and these are just the feelings I have. But then we start to question, and then we start to be like, wait a second, like, why is it the vagina that's only focused on? And, you know, is it a focus on penetration, a focus on male pleasure? Because that's how men maybe get off often, you know, but it's like, oh, what about, and I don't, YouTube may or may not censor all of this. I hope I don't get kicked off of YouTube, but, you know, there's a whole book called Becoming Clitorate by Lori Mintz, and it gets into the importance of that and some of the myths you're kind of saying about, like, where do people experience pleasure? And that's actually one of the questions I get a lot on the Peanut app as well, is, you know, I want to have a real orgasm, or like, how come I can't have an orgasm during penetration? And it's kind of like, well, it's not like a real orgasm. It's like, they're all real. I just want to say that, you know, it's more about like what feels good to you. And it also does depend a little bit on your anatomy. So I think some of the research they've done on that is like, it depends on, and I'm going to probably mess this up, like how close like the urethra and the vagina and the clitoris are to each other. And it's like, you know, whatever ratios or something. And that's also why I think it's kind of important that we know our anatomy, you know, because if we're kind of like, oh, mine's farther apart, and so I'm probably not going to get as much stimulation that way. It's like, knowledge is power, right? And so it's like, someone's got to be telling us these things. And there's some stats on like, women don't even look at, and I should say people, vagina owners, don't always look at their vulvas, because, you know, ours are more internal, first of all, but, you know, like, if people had to find their own clitoris, like, could everyone find it? No way. Absolutely not. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I just feel like we're starting by talking about it, you know, calling some things out. I think that's a good step, but I'm kind of like, there should be some kind of like tutorial of like, this is your body. This is where your clitoris is. This is how most, you know, people with a clitoris experience orgasm. Like, here's some things you can try. Like, I have like a YouTube video on health benefits of orgasms. And I think when I started researching that, I was like, oh my God, there's actually so many. And like, all I was taught was like, be afraid, be very afraid.
Yes.
You know?
Right.
And it worked. Like, I mean, I didn't have sex till I was 24. You know, which is not, it's like not good, bad, or indifferent, you know, like, it is what it is. But like, but yeah, there was a lot of fear there for me. And so that was part of, you know, what I've worked through.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's a lot of that in general, you know, being someone with a vagina, you know, a uterus, you have to, you know, the parents typically and societal norms bring you up to think, you know, avoid pregnancy, don't have sex until you're married. You know, you know, there is definitely a shift coming away from that. You know, I think my own personal beliefs, you know, is that it's a little bit tricky. It's a very tricky subject because, you know, I think if we're not careful, we could really change things morally and in a way that it's like, that people tend to not care for themselves and for those that they may hurt or affect in some way on an emotional level.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. I actually have a freebie on my website called Sex for Empaths, and that's basically what it addresses is like,
Cool.
yeah, so it's kind of this just little checklist, and it kind of goes over like, am I actually just having sex because I want validation? Like,
What
am
a
I
question to ask, though.
yeah.
What a question to
Seriously.
ask. Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of like, am I having clean energetic boundaries kind of for myself? Am I, not kind of taking responsibility for my partner? Am I fully showing up for myself? Like, am I trying to like get a certain outcome? Or am I just like, hey, this seems like fun. I'm wanting to connect with this person. I'm still taking care of myself emotionally and energetically. Cool. Go have fun. And I don't care if people have, tons of casual sex or if they wait till they're married. Because I still think you can have like casual sex or friends with benefits and kind of follow those guidelines for yourself.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it comes down to communication, like
Oh yeah.
what is it that you are wanting? One
Yeah.
of the things I know, Jody, Lynn, and I have done a lot of work in Alison Armstrong's
Oh yeah.
programs. And one of the things that she really talks a lot about is just being clear on what your
Mhm.
intentions are, what you wish to, acquire and give in the
Yeah.
relationship. And I think that, what you're talking about here is a lot about communicating what it is that you want and what it
Mhm.
is you're willing to provide in
Yeah.
the relationship.
Right. And it's like, if you're not at a point where you can have that conversation, then I feel like do some solo work, first before you can
Right.
get to that point. But,
Yeah.
two mature people can have that conversation pretty early on. It's like when
Right.
you're comfortable with yourself and when you are clear and you're kind of owning that. Because I think with sex, and I do think it's often because we want the validation. It's kind of like, well, I'll just compromise a little bit. Or like, well, I don't know, this person's like really hot. So like it's probably just fine.
I hope that he likes me more.
Yeah.
Like, what a
Yeah.
misnomer. Me and Heather have talked about this a lot. What would we teach our daughters about
Yeah.
sex? And one thing that I would say is that, sleeping with somebody isn't going to guarantee that they're going to like you more. So don't use it as that weapon or with that charge, because it's not
Exactly.
often not going to get you what you want.
Exactly. So yeah, I think it's about like you showing up for you, being
Mhm.
authentic, being in alignment, expressing yourself freely, discussing boundaries and consent.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think
Something
when
else.
you do that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just was gonna say, when you do that at the beginning, I think then it facilitates a lot of freedom and letting go and safety. And so then I
Yeah.
think you're going to have better sex.
Absolutely.
True.
Something that I learned, within like the last 5, 6, 7 years, somewhere around that, like I would say recently,
Mhm.
is that there is a difference between the chemicals that the chemical exposure or chemicals that form in your body for women versus men. And and
Mhm.
it affects your brain differently. And knowing that information or hearing that information and choosing to believe it, I could start seeing different patterns in my own sex life when I was single, of like this need for somebody after intercourse, or like this needy feeling that came up kind of out of nowhere, like a
Yeah.
obsession or whatever. And I'm just wondering if you talk about that with your clients too, or if that's
Oh
something
yeah.
that you've dabbled in. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like what you're getting at is a little bit of anxious attachment. So I would say attachment is my other favorite topic aside from sex. So those are my two things that I like love helping people with. And I do think that also goes back to like, are you first and foremost showing up for yourself, or are you kind of outsourcing your sense of security or outsourcing your validation to this other person? So like
Yeah.
when you don't do that, I kind of call that like kind of clean, energetic boundaries. So when you're not doing that, the sky's the limit. And there might need to be some recalibrating still, because I will notice for myself, like I might check in beforehand and pause and reflect and make sure something's feeling good for me. And it still might, be like, oh, okay, I'm still disappointed I didn't hear from this person the next day, or I'm still disappointed, you know, whatever
Whatever.
whatever outcome that wasn't what you were expecting or hoping for. So sometimes I think our hopes and expectations can be a little sneaky. You might be like, oh, I didn't realize that was there until afterwards, but that's okay. Then you show up for yourself, you take care of yourself, you learn, maybe you make a few little changes for next time. But one of the approaches I use with people is called internal family systems. And I view it as like a form of energy healing. So we talk about like your self energy, and your self energy is calm and confident and spacious and intuitive and playful. And it's the essence of who all of us are. It's kind of like our little piece of, divine or source energy. And then we have parts, and that I think of the parts as being a little bit more a part of like the ego. And so our parts could be manager parts that are proactive and kind of leading our life and trying to achieve goals and prevent problems. And then we can also have firefighter parts that are reactive. And that's where we get people, acting out with substances, acting out with sexuality, trying to maybe get rid of an unpleasant feeling. So more on the reactive side. And then we have our exiled parts. And those are the parts that I think come up a lot with sex. And our whole system of parts tend to be organized around keeping shame at bay, keeping a feeling of being not good enough or unlovable at bay, keeping a feeling away that, you're too vulnerable or unsafe. And all of those come up with sex, or can.
Yeah.
And so that's another reason why I think that this is such an interesting area to work with in terms of consciousness, because once we start kind of healing those exiled parts, which we do by connecting with the parts through self energy. So instead of kind of being like, I'm going to be my good student part, or I'm going to be a therapist or a coach part or whatever, and, try and manage my other parts, that tends to not work as well. But when we get into that self energy, we can relate to the parts from there. There tends to be a lot of healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow.
I have so many questions and I'm trying to formulate them in my head.
Just go for it. Yeah.
So one of the things that, as we talk about sex and we talk about the lower region of the physicality areas. Okay. I tend to look at those along with like the chakra systems.
Yeah.
That sometimes, you were talking earlier about the stored trauma. And, one of the things that I was kind of wondering about as we were preparing for this call today is if there is trauma to that physical region, and it could be anywhere, but I'm using that specific area. So like the pelvic area.
Yeah.
Is that trauma stored in the cellular makeup of the humanity, or is it stored in the energy center of the like sacral chakra or the root chakra? Like,
yeah.
Do you know what where I'm going with this? From your perspective, what do you think?
It's definitely stored in the physicality. There's research on that our emotions are in our bodies. That's interesting about the chakra system. I mean, I would think it is impacted in the chakra system as well, because you'll do Reiki healing sessions or other sessions that address chakra imbalances. What I will say, though, is that our self energy, which I was just describing, is not impacted by trauma. So that, kind of divine source energy. And I love this. I think it's just part of why like humans are so resilient and amazing, is that like there's this essence of us that is not impacted by trauma, and I think we can focus, especially in mental health, about like, well, this is wrong with me and this is wrong with me. And I have this diagnosis and I have this issue that I'm trying to work on. And it's like we can get into that like pathologizing of ourselves and forget that like there's this core of you that's like just kind of perfect and awesome.
In every way.
Yeah.
In every way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So don't forget that.
That's a good reminder.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. I need it too. So
yeah, absolutely. So what do you recommend for somebody who has those stored emotions in like traumatic stuff that's happened, or, what are some of the steps that you would take them through?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably do an internal family systems approach. It is a good method for trauma healing. And so usually that starts by locating it in our body. And I think that's something that, anyone listening can do that on their own. So it could be like, I'm feeling anxiety. I'm feeling kind of an abandonment part that's triggered. I'm feeling afraid of intimacy, whatever it is. you can then locate that in your body. And so like anxiety is a common one that I like to use with people, because usually that tends to be like in the chest or throat area for most people. And it tends to be kind of like a tension feeling in that area. And so I think that's a good one where people can start noticing, like, what does that feel like in my body? And then as you practice kind of noticing different emotions and like how, they show up in your body in different ways. It might be something feeling a little shaky. It might be something feeling tingly. It might be sort of a pulsing sensation. So one of the ways I like to ask people when they get a little stuck with this, and because I do think most of us are fairly disconnected from our bodies, is like, this is a kind of weird question. Like, if an alien were dropped into your body, how would they know you're feeling anxious? How would they know you're feeling afraid?
Ooh.
It's like they don't have any other data, just like what's happening in your body. Because I think we tend to over-identify with like thoughts and like brain activity. And it is often the thought that will create or trigger the emotion in the body. But what I have found is that, cognitive behavioral approaches only work so well. And I feel like the healing, in my experience, is really in the body.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I think that, when you're only dealing with the mind, you're missing so much of yourself. It's another way that you're like blocking yourself from learning all of the parts of you and accepting all of the parts of you. And, we've talked lots on this show about, how emotions get lodged and cause dis-ease within the body. And that's, a perfect example is this too, sexual trauma or trauma of any kind that's stuck, and, everything is impacting everything, in my opinion. I think it's all relative.
Right. It's like we're one system. We're not like 10 different compartments that operate independently. Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. To switch gears or to shift a little bit, we had a question in our prep session when we were preparing for this of what does it look like, from your opinion, being like our expert? Is there a difference between men and women and age? And does that play into sex drive, like all of those things? And can you give us some examples of what that looks like?
Interesting question. I have so many opinions on this.
Perfect.
I think our society is so effed up around age in general. I'm 42, and it's like once you turn 40, it's like now all of these like vitamins for old people marketed to you. Or like you go to your doctor, and it's like from 39 to 40, it's like all of a sudden you get like different questions or like different risk assessments, AARP. By the way, you can join AARP at any age and get great discounts.
I don't even know what AARP is.
I know. Yeah.
It's like a retirement thing.
It's like an organization. Yeah. There's like a travel influencer I follow, and he was like, by the way, if you guys join this, you get like all these flight discounts. I was like, awesome. But yeah, just the age comments people make. So does that trickle into sexuality? 100%. And I think I mentioned at the beginning about, I think that people perceive younger people as being more like sexual or more attractive. And that's just kind of, there's probably like a biological factor with that, but I think a lot of it is like socialization. It's like when I think about the Bachelor franchise, and like, I will admit that's a guilty pleasure at times, so not 100% dissing them, but, I do kind of want to call out that like, it's all younger people, I don't know if they've ever had anyone over 40 on there. It's all people with like certain body types, right? They've historically been like not very racially diverse, and like they're working on it, but like still very like so on that. And so it's like, this is like kind of what's held up is like the cultural norms in a lot of ways. This is something that tons of people watch. And I think it's really prevalent. I mean, you don't see a lot of, this is part of why I love How to Build a Sex Room, because the designer in there is a little bit older, she's like white hair, and she's not like the traditional sexy body type, but she has this like super fun, playful sexual energy. And I think people just like adore her for it. And I was just like, yes, like more of this, please. I don't want people to think like, oh, we just get older and then we just, We just stop being sexual and we like
we start growing mold and then we die.
Yeah, we just kind of like, grow mold. Yeah, basically.
Exactly.
But I do think that
to dust.
I think it's a little bit more with women, it's like you see so many kind of, especially in Hollywood. I just think like, what are the kind of cultural references that we have? And it's shifting a little bit, but you see a lot of like older men with younger women. As the guy ages, it's like, oh, guys age better, or like guys look great when they're this age. So I do think there's some of those factors that correspond with gender.
Well, and let's just be real for a second about, men aging better than women.
Yeah.
Okay. That is such crap.
Yeah.
That's such crap. And nonsense. The reason why it's crap is because men are not held to the same standard that women are held to physically, right? It's perfectly okay for them to have gray hair, wrinkles, and a beer belly, right? Nobody like says anything. Those types of shapes and aesthetics are on TV, but you don't see females like that, right?
No.
I mean, it's starting to change. It's starting to change. What year are we in?
I know.
It's just now starting. So, I mean, the thing is it's like, I feel like, oh man, here comes the womanist in me, that women have been a little bit pigeonholed into a specific aesthetic. And I think that's really shitty, quite frankly, because women and men are beautiful just being who they are. I worked for many, many years in the aesthetics industry, and, it was unbelievable how just someone having their eyebrows tattooed on would like change their life.
Yeah.
And it's because of this like brainwashing of how, women should look and be and smell and act and everything. And it's just, next.
And you would probably know that better than most people, having worked in that industry, and like, it's tough. And I think it's tough for a lot of women to find that balance, but also men, I work with male clients too. And like, I kind of think they have just as many hangups about appearance, to be honest. So I think I'm like, can we just stop doing this to ourselves, please?
Just be nicer.
I know. I'm like, what if we're just all fine how we are? But so I do think that there is a little bit of a difference there, but if we remove the cultural piece, do I think that there's really like an age thing? No, I actually don't. I think that there are hormonal things. So because I work with a lot of like kind of new moms on the Peanut app, I do see a lot of like hormonal stuff around pregnancy. I also think there's a lot of like shifting roles. So I do think like life stage is relevant. So it's like if somebody, and the Gottman Research Institute, they study couples and couples counseling. I think their statistic is that 70% of marriages decline in the first year after having a new child. And so it's huge. It's a huge number, right? And so it's like there's the hormonal factors, and then there's also like the life factors. There's just additional stressors. There's less time for yourself. Some people have more support and like they're fine, and other people don't have as much support. So that's a thing. And then I also do think that I see a lot of postmenopausal women who don't have as much of a libido. And I wonder though, like how much of that is socialization? I think a lot, because I also think like that's more my parents' generation. And I mean, they were really not talking about sex. They weren't talking about sex with the people they were having sex with for years or decades, So it's kind of like, okay, like that has to be a factor. Certainly, I think they also grew up much more religious than I did. They went to like Catholic schools like their whole life. And I think that was more common like when they were growing up. So I think there's a lot of cultural factors there. So it's hard to separate it out. But I do think there's some hormonal things going on, really regardless of gender. But if you're somebody going through menopause, it's not uncommon for sex drive to decline. I think that a lot of gynecologists also don't want to do the hormonal testing, and they're kind of like, oh, that's just normal. You're just postmenopausal. And I'm always kind of like, I'd like some data. like it could be low testosterone. Like testosterone is actually like a huge factor in libido. And so like I have a girlfriend who's a year younger than me, and she had low testosterone, and she got like these pellet injection things that she gets like twice a year. It was like night and day for her libido. It can also be something that's impacting mental health, energy levels, So I think just, again, knowledge is power. Like, find out. And if people have doctors that like won't order it, first of all, find a new doctor. Second of all, you can order your own test these days, like Everlywell has like a bunch of tests. There's like direct labs or consumer labs. I've ordered some of my own stuff. So it's actually pretty easy these days to kind of find out. And I'm a little bit into biohacking stuff, and I haven't decided what I will do when I get to the menopause, but I follow Dave Asprey, and his Superhuman book talks about the Wiley protocol. And that's kind of a protocol where you almost like trick your body into thinking it's fertile still, because from a like evolutionary perspective, we kind of like stay alive to reproduce and then die off a little bit. So it's kind of like, maybe just convince your body it's still fertile. See how that goes. Like some interesting idea.
This out.
Makes some sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, wow. This has been an awesome conversation. Do you have, I know you mentioned a couple of like free things that you got on your website. Is there anything that, you want to direct our audience to that's going on that you have?
Yeah, I wonder if I can actually put it in the chat, or I don't know if you guys do like show notes after or whatever.
We do,
but
yeah.
So I'm launching my podcast. I'm really excited. So it's going to be January 9th. It's coming out. It's called Ask a Sex Therapist. And I do have a Facebook group for that. So anyone who wants to support the launch and, listen, subscribe, write reviews, share it with people, that kind of thing. I'm going to be doing a 5-day challenge and giving away like all sorts of prizes, like sessions with me. We have the Pleasure Chest is going to donate some kind of sex toys. I actually have some like businessy friends who are going to donate some business consulting. So it'll be fun. And we already have like 150 some people in there, and it's like a very sex positive kind of engaged group. So that's what I'm most excited about. But yeah, people can also take advantage of my freebies, which I would recommend because they're free. So it's heathershannon.co, and there's a little freebies tab, or you could just go right to the URL heathershannon.co/freebies. And I have the Sex for Empaths checklist there. I have Mojo Magic libido guide. I have top 10 relationship traps. These are like the common mistakes people make. And then I'm blanking on the other one, but check them out. The libido thing is super common. That's one of the most common reasons people see a sex therapist. And it can be complex. Like we're talking about, there's age, and there's what's going on in your relationship, and there's the socialization, and there's the hormones and all of that. So that can at least help you figure out like, where do I even start looking to deal with this?
Oh, wow. I love that you have all of these free things to
They're really fun to make, actually.
Yeah. Well, and to download and read. I love resources, and I 100% agree with you that, the knowledge is power, or even knowledge applied is our power.
Yep.
And this is obviously a huge conversation, and we've just, scratched the surface, but we want to thank you for coming on today and enlightening us.
Thank you. This was so fun talking to you guys. Thanks for having me.
We loved this.
Feelings mutual. This was fun.
Yeah. I was like, oh gosh, I'm going to get so red.
You did good, Jody Lynn. You did good.
I held my own.
You did great.
In all honesty, I am like sweating.
And that's okay. But we'll definitely have to have you on, Heather, again to do a deeper dive into some of these areas and get some questions from our audience of what they want to hear. And again, if you guys listening to this conversation have loved it, make sure that you hit that like button and that you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. And just to kind of wrap up, thank you again, Heather, for being here. We're going to continue the trend next week, and we're going to start talking about families, and we're going to deep dive into that and channel some stuff there. So please join us next week at 2:00 Mountain, 3:00 Central, 1:00 Pacific, and all the other time zones. So you can figure it out on your own. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you next week.